Volume 6 v48. The first matter attended to on the return to Hobans was the public marriage of Ines Ulgan and Kalka Bessares. Given the wartime situation and the still unsettled matter in the southern Holy Kingdom, only a week was spent in preparation, and it involved an elaborate feast and abundant alcohol provided by the crown to the entire city. Decorations were plentiful, bards sang praises to the gifting king who offered victory to faithful allies. And on the night of the wedding's end, Ines joined Kalka in her private chambers. "You're leaving tomorrow, I assume?" He nodded. "I have been away from my affairs for some time, I can't leave them forever." "And the woman you love, she is waiting for you there?" Kalka asked as she undressed again. "She is," Ines answered as he did the same. "And you are?" She hesitated. He came close and touched her cheek. "I've learned what I needed, and then some. I have done a lot wrong, as a man, as a king. Some couldn't be avoided, but what could have? All I can do is make up for it." "You were helpful in that," he said to her, and she covered his hand with her own. "Promise me something. I know how it is with men and the women they love. I'm not the fool I was, but will you keep your word with me?" Kalka said without meeting his eyes, though she did rub the back of his hand with her palm. "The child I bear, ensure that this throne is always theirs and those of all the descendants you live to see, as long as they're worthy of it. Typically, the firstborn of a king gets the whole of his rule, but I see it in you. You have eyes for only one, and you won't deprive her child of that. But don't deprive our child of this. This will be his country, his home. Never take it away. I promise you, as long as the Bessares blood endures, and so do I, that one of them will sit on the throne of the Roble Holy Kingdom," he said as they lay down slowly on the bed. "Then tonight, we make them," she whispered into his ear, and began to do as she said. Ines was up and ready before dawn. He placed a small kiss on Kalka's forehead. A twinge of guilt touched him for his role in the chaos of her kingdom. "I was a fool, but I was right. In the long run, for all the harm, this will create the best possible world for all my children," he told himself, and cast the gate spell at once, stepped through it, and was gone. The rest of his retinue would leave on their own, the empty carriage receiving abundant adulation as it made its long journey home. When he stepped through the other side and back into his throne room, he found Albedo waiting for him, and a small, slender elf that was clutching a body. Even without asking, he knew it was the one who died. "Have you been here this whole time?" he asked, forgetting all formality in dismay at the scene. "Myself, no, my lord. I have of course tended your holdings." Albedo remained formal, but he could see her body twitching, itching to dive at him as if they were alone. "But this one. Tell your story." Albedo gave the order, and words rushed past the radiant elf's lips. "She gave up her life for me, to let me be safe. I didn't even know she loved me until then. I didn't know I loved her either. Not till I saw what she did. Please, master. She wasn't truthful before. It wasn't just money that she wanted. She didn't like being human. She didn't like how people were. She wanted to be something else. But she felt bad about saying it, like scum next to you. Please, if there is anything I can offer, even if I have to give you my life in exchange, can my Skana be restored?" Ileana clutched the corpse a little tighter to her body, and Ines looked from her to Albedo. "Have a maid take them to Demiurge, just make sure he knows that neither are to be harmed." Ileana's face lit up bright as the sun when Albedo pulled on a nearby golden silk rope. "When it's done, join me in my quarters," Ines said and coughed several times, clearing his throat. "We have something to discuss." Albedo's face fell. I understand, master," she said in a small voice. Demiurge stood over the brown-haired human woman. "So, Remedios, is it? My, you are an unusual one." Remedios didn't answer. Those under paralysis generally didn't. "You're so unusual in fact, that you earned a punishment that only a supreme being could have conceived," he said and patted her cheek with light, almost tender slaps. The dense idiot only gave off an aura of confusion. "We're not allowed to torture you, or kill you, but you will still suffer on your own, and it will be all you that does it to yourself. Can you believe it?" he asked, and watched as she struggled to shake her head. All she managed was a tiny wiggle. "Now, let me ask you this, would you prefer we start off by turning you into an elf or a rat woman?" Demiurge inquired. Though she couldn't do much, He could feel her eyes fill with horror even while the expression remained unchanged. "Just kidding," Demiurge said with a playful voice. "You won't get a choice. We have no idea what transformation will be permanent, so who knows what you'll be spending the rest of your life as. But given that you despise everything but humans for some absurd reason, I believe you'll be plunged into your own personal hell no matter how long it takes, or what you end up as. Wouldn't you agree?" She tried to scream, to move, to shake her body, and when her body was covered with fur and he showed her what she looked like as a rat woman, her screams became mouse-like squeaks. "Now, off to the frozen prison to see how long this takes before it wears off. Maybe we'll try an elf next. You like those, don't you?" he asked and called for a maid by pulling on a rope before wheeling the table she was bound to, over to the door. "Just kidding, don't care either way, we'll just see what happens, all for the greater good, of course," he said, and when Entama entered and took the cart away, her wailing squeak quickly faded away. Before he even had the time to get bored, CZ Delta entered carrying a very dead human and an elf woman following closely behind. "What is this?" Demiurge asked the blank-faced battle maid. "One raised dead, not as a human. One who gets it as a reward," CZ said in her clipped fashion, and for a moment Demiurge's face was disappointed. "Oh. Well, it's fine, I did need to perfect that routine anyway." He pointed to another smooth metal table on wheels. "Put the body on there and bring me more scrolls. I'm almost out." "Yes, Lord Demiurge," CZ said, and flopped the limp body on the metal table with a loud clang, and said to Ileana, "Wait outside when you're done. I will take you to Lady Albedo's room when I return." She then made her exit. Ileana fidgeted, sniffles still going while the curious slender demon in the pinstripe suit fiddled with various mana crystals and stuck them on various places of Skarna's corpse. "What are those for, sir?" Ileana asked. "Data," he answered with cryptic indifference. He then held a scroll over Skarna's head and said, "Morphomancy 5 change status wood elf." Before Ileana could process what he said, the scroll burned up with mystic blue flames, and the body began to change. Then with another scroll in hand, True Resurrection. Skarna shot up to a seated position on the table, green eyes and wild hands flailing in a defensive position. "Feisty, the most responsive one yet," Demiurge said offhandedly. "I'd say that works." He added and went to pick up the blue crystals that flew off her body and clattered to the floor. "Skarna," Ileana replied and wrapped her arms around the woman, embracing her all over again. "Ileana, I was. The soldiers. What? I feel different." She caught a glimpse of herself in the polished steel pieces around the room. "My ears. My skin." She was cut off from speaking further as Ileana laid a fierce kiss against her lips. That was something Skarna was more than ready for and familiar with melting into. But all kisses must break, and when at last they stopped to breathe again, Skarna asked, "Can someone tell me what's happening? You were dead, but now you're not. You were a human, now, thanks to my genius, you are an elf, and probably permanently, but I can't be sure about that until you've lived at least one elven lifespan." Demiurge explained, preening contentedly, "My first thought was to turn you into a catwoman, or an angel, or even a demon, but given the circumstances, knowing you came from a human supremacist nation that enslaved elves by the thousand, the irony was just too delicious." "I'm an elf," Skarna said, and Ileana cupped her cheeks and turned the former human to face her. "I didn't make the decision. I know how your race feels about my kind, most of them." And Ileana stammered out a bit, until Skarna's eyes brightened and she pressed her lips against those of her partner in espionage. It was long, lingering, and her tongue delved and dueled with the former prostitute using her considerable experience as both a wanton amateur and a professional, and when that kiss broke, leaving Ileana wide-eyed and quiet, Skarna answered, "If I'm with you, I'll be happy being anything. But where do we go from here? Our work is done, I assume." Skarna's eyes would not move from where they remained locked on the woman she loved. "I vowed to serve Lady Albedo for as long as I live. As she hasn't gotten rid of me, I assume she accepts that, and as she chose to let me beg for your life, I'm sure she'll have enough work for us both," Ileana suggested, and then she took Skarna's hand and helped the woman down from the table. "I hope so," Skarna said emphatically. "I'm confident she does," Demiurge said and pointed to the door after laying his crystals out on the counter along with many other implements that had a wide variety of uses, most of them not at all nice. Now go wait outside until CZ returns. I have work to do, he snapped in annoyance, and put his back to them before they were even out the door. Neither woman let go of the other's hand for hours thereafter. Heinz stood outside the door to his room, his heart pounding in his chest. She's probably naked in there, or ready to jump at me. Or both. I can't avoid this forever. I did this to her. I have to face up to it. Go on in, you coward. You said you were ready. He sighed at his self-defeating thoughts, ignoring the voice in his head that kept him avoiding her for so damn long. He pressed the door to his room open, and found Albedo, sitting on a chair, hands folded demurely in her lap, legs closed, eyes down. He closed the door as quietly as he could and approached her. Albedo, he said, and touched her beneath the chin with his forefinger, then gently raised up her face so that her golden eyes were up to face him. Master, she said. A lot happened out there, didn't it? He asked. You did very good work, and I am very proud of you. She nodded, her heart sang at the praise, but broke at the paternal tone of it. It was for you, she said succinctly, without outburst. And it was for all of you. A world where all of my children can live happily and safely, where nobody will want to hurt you, Ein said with his hand roaming her cheek. I saw everything. My lord. Your time with the human queen, Kalka. Albedo jumped straight to the subject. I didn't care that you mated with her, and I don't care if you produced a child with her. You are a god, our god, the whole world is yours, and you can do as you like. She swallowed, her golden eyes pooled. But I do not love you as a child. I am a woman, a demon succubus woman, but a woman, and no matter what you did the day the Second World ended, I would have loved you anyway. That is the truth, Albedo said emphatically, and she took his hand at the wrist and drew it away. She folded his fingers in like a fist and kissed his knuckles. We can't lie to you, I can't lie to you. So you know that what I'm saying now is absolutely so. Don't you? She almost begged him to know, a tiny crack in her voice as she asked for him to understand. Albedo, I can't undo what I did, and I can't erase my sense of guilt for having done it. But I can. Well, I got some experience with the nature of a woman's heart, seeing what absence of a loved one does, what it means. And I took what I did to hurt you, then made it worse, and I'm sorry. He replied to her. She opened her mouth to speak, but his forefinger came out from his fist and covered her lips. The truth is, I've dreamed of you almost every night, and... He almost mentioned his and Kalka's pretend time, but thought the better of it and said, and the truth is, I'm in my own way. I don't know how long I'll be human, or what I'll be next. I've been a fool for years now, since the change. I feared they wouldn't accept me for what I was, and you most of all. And because of that, I pushed everyone away. My own fears did that. But I was obviously wrong. Nobody cared, nobody. I was in my own way the whole time, and now if you can accept that I'm sorry for all of that. And how I am, and how I will be one day. He trailed off, then he crouched down, took a breath, and then lurched forward to capture her lips in a kiss. Their hearts beat in sync with one another almost immediately, their tongues duelled and explored one another as he dreamt many a night. Only their clothing got in the way of what was to come, and both hastened to remove every scrap of fabric in the way without breaking the locking of their lips. Ein's hands moved faster than they ever had in battle, and one thought thrummed through his mind as they flashed faster than the eye could follow. I don't want to keep her waiting anymore. Volume 6 C49. A month and a half after the departure of the Allfather, Kalka lay in her royal bed rubbing the slight bulge beginning on her belly. Beside her in the bed, Kellet began to rub it with her, but it was an absent gesture. Both were reading different documents. So the last Southern Holy Kingdom holdouts have given up, promising to limit their sentences to 2 years in the mines if they abandoned the nobles, versus 15 years if they didn't. Certainly did the trick. Kellet remarked offhandedly. Yes, it did. Gustav finished the last of them with ease, and it looks like he found my brother alive, none the worse for wear either, just bored out of his mind and hungry for news. I doubt he'll want to visit the south anytime soon, but other than that? Kalka shrugged. I'm just glad he's all right. She picked up another document. Have you checked to see the latest runecraft orders? My husband is giving us a discount. But it's still costly. I did. I offered to trade in materials. It'll cut back a little bit at first on what we sell to Queen Baraha, but with the extra labor that won't be long, we might even be able to sell her more before long. If anything, Even with the runecraft purchase, we're going to be exceptionally rich, Kellett pointed out. Speaking of, what about the repatriations of our prisoners? Calco asked. Most of them are coming back, but there's now a lot of empty land. Frankly speaking, since the demi-humans during their invasion actually killed a lot of the monsters in the forests, we should be able to expand with ease for at least the next 5 or 10 years. Don't tell anyone I said this, but we should have had them invade years ago. Kellett laughed at her own joke, but Calca did not. Many died, the Queen replied, and Kellett lowered her eyes. Dark humor for dark times. She apologized to her queen. Times aren't dark anymore, they're getting brighter every day, Calca replied, and Kellett nodded. All right, but still, I'm just saying that it cleared up a lot of problems that our old system didn't. We've got room for new nobles, new merchants. And the guild has a dozen petitions for contracts, and we have some heroes to raise up from the Adventurers Guild and from the military, Kellett pointed out. Well and good, but we should turn an eye toward the leadership in the principal movement, Calca pointed out. At first I admit I thought of them as busybodies, but they've genuinely done some good acting as the public conscience. The founding priest even had words with Gustav about the venture south. Oh? Kellett's ears pricked up. About what, do you know? The priest went to Gustav with concerns about how the peasants and innocent people of the south would be treated, and Gustav said a woman he met on his darkest day told him, if the side you should be on doesn't exist, make it, and that he wanted to be on the side that could sleep at night. They're fast friends now, and as a result, the principal movement sent volunteers with the army to help with relief efforts. Principle. It's a fine thing when carried out, most of the time. Calca looked out the window for a moment, mustered up her courage, and then asked. Are you okay with what happened to your sister? Calca asked, and squeezed the fingers of her lover. Kellett looked out the window where the sun was barely peeking over the distant horizon. Remedios made her own fate. If she tortures herself until she learns something, that is her choice. Even I couldn't save her from that. There's no worse suffering than self-loathing. Maybe eventually, she'll come back to us better, and if she doesn't, she did worse to many more. That's all that can be, Calca whispered. The same goes for the slain theocracy. I won't forget their role in all this. Kellett growled and set aside the paper she was reading. Nor I, Calca hissed. But for now. She winked at her advisor. Of course. Before anyone else is awake, Kellett suggested with a little teasing smile on her face. Did you forget the ones who work on this floor now? Calca asked archly. My husband's security, his guards and maids, are right outside. Keeping everyone else away from us. Thank you, His Majesty. Those loyal summons will keep all rumors at bay. After all, who would believe that the king would tolerate a private consort for his queen under his own royal guards? She let out a playful giggle and went to wrap her arms around her beloved queen again. She savored the sound of the gasps of pleasure that followed, and there was no need for any of it to be silent thereafter. Astraca knelt with his siblings and parents before the throne of the Queen of Frost. Welcome, my allies. Welcome. Naya stood and held up her arms, her tail lashed, cat-like and content at her back. She was still getting used to it, but there was no more itching, and so she assumed her transformation was complete. But it clearly threw Astraca for a bit of a loop as he kept staring at it. Yes, I have this now. That should be the end of things though. I'm still getting used to it myself, Naya said as she descended from her seat. Her voice echoed off the finished walls of her towering palace. Between the human labor and Nazarian's diligence, everything had come together flawlessly. Astraca cleared his throat as if to apologize, but Naya didn't give him a chance. She put a hand on his shoulder and said, in the south, you were minor nobles, far from the throne. But you supported me when other humans did not. And as luck would have it, I need human nobles specifically right now. All of the family's heads snapped up, Astraca's, his father's, mother's, and 2 other young men who appeared to be Astraca's age. You see, Naya explained, while most of our human prisoners are going to be going home, about 10,000 or so have chosen to remain. It would be best for now at least, if human subjects had human lords, and there is a fair-sized swath of land I can divide up amongst all 3 sons. Of course I know you will need wives, but with that in mind I have reached out to the Kingdom of Nazarick, asking that they send brides worthy of great lords on par with the old ones of Riastais. Assuming of course, you don't object? No. All 5 shouted at once, and their reticent looks were all but gone. "I thought not," Naya said with a chuckle of satisfaction. "Naya," she turned when she heard her father's voice, "you aren't scaring anyone again, are you?" She rolled her eyes. "No, father, they're just excited." "Have you heard back from the elves yet? Has mother gotten them settled?" "Yes, she has. They're in the forests in the northeast and will deal with her for all their needs while you help them get started. And I've just about finished dealing with the dark dwarves. They're ready to move on to the next area now that your capital is well enough established. Have you chosen a name for it?" "Tavija. After two of our heroes," Naya answered immediately. "That's a good start, Naya, and I'm proud of you," he said, and Naya didn't even try to hide the beaming on her face when she turned back to the Astrakas family. "Now, let's get you settled. Trade needs to get laid out, and I'm giving you all the bricks from the old wall between nations. You can use that to make all the roads you need, until you run out of course. But that'll do for a start. Wouldn't you agree, Astraka?" Naya asked, and it was clearly a rhetorical question, giving the rare broad, fangy smile on her face and her happily lashing tail. "Of course, Your Majesty," he answered anyway, without a doubt in his heart. "Just one more thing before we get going to get you settled too. Wait here," she said, and walked outside to find Dark waiting at the base of the palace steps. She waved to the dragon with a sincere smile still held on her face, and she used her wings to gently flutter down above the stairs until she was eye to eye with him. "So, are you sure about this?" she asked. "Yes, my whole clan survived, and the Allfather has set aside a mountain preserve expressly for our use. I do have an obligation to them," the Frost Dragon replied. "Thank you, though, for saving my life," he said. "And thank you for the same," she said, and put her talons to his snout. "I never imagined this life, but I can't imagine trading it for anything, even as much as it hurts. It's a good one. Malbian will thrive, and I hope you and your family come often to visit," Naya said, and the dragon inclined his head toward her. "We will. But what is next while I'm gone?" he asked. "More trade programs with the Dark Elves, Dark Dwarves, and humans, including the more distant kingdom of Nazarick, you know. I think if I'd lived a different life, I could have loved him like a father. But a royal brother is a good fit too," Naya said. "I like him a lot more than I thought, and the way his power grows, after we're established, perhaps I'll offer to become his vassal. It certainly beats fighting him. That one wasn't meant to be beaten." Naya shook her head with absolute confidence in her words. "Then I wish you well, and when next you call for kings and queens to gather, the Lord of the Mountain Top will come and call you little sister with pride," Dark promised. "Then best of luck to you," Naya said. "I won't say goodbye, I hate goodbyes. Let's just call it. Till next time." "Till next time, Naya," Dark replied. He then turned, batted his wings, and took off to the east. Naya watched him until he was fully out of sight, even to her eyes, and a voice down below called out to her. "My queen." Naya looked down to see Nazreen holding a wooden board with papers affixed to it, and she slowly descended to the ground again. "Yes, Nazreen?" Naya gave the chief a genuinely warm, if thankful smile. "She really did a marvelous job out here. Keeping her as my personal attendant was a damn good idea. I needed a secretary, even if she is a little more ruthless than most. I just wanted to say." She cleared her throat, "Remember also, the slain theocracy." Naya turned her gaze to the southeast. "Yes, I do," she said, and looked up at Nazreen and added, "Just like that, and say it to me every morning, and every evening before we finish for the day, until we've taught them that humans are not as supreme as they think they are." "As you command, Your Majesty," Nazreen replied with a little half-bow, and fell into step just behind her queen. Naya looked over her shoulder as she climbed the steps on foot. Behind her, buildings of wood and stone lined orderly streets. Trade was taking place in orderly fashion with standardized coins. Strong guards were keeping order, and judges selected by the clans themselves were solving disputes without decreasing her population. The shining sun shone down on the whole country, and beyond the great city, beyond even the distant green farms that her eyes, and not many others could see, there lay a vast open land waiting on her vision of the future. She turned back toward the palace. "Now come along, we've got a lot of work to do." Ainz woke up in the morning with Albedo still entwined in his arms, still joined at the waist, and their warmth mingling like the hot embers of a fire that was just waiting to blaze to life again. She felt him stir, and rolled over to face him. "Will my love be going anywhere today?" she asked. "No," he said with a broad Cheshire smile, "I'm staying." Volume 7 C1 Bloody Crown. Jerkniv sat alone in his quarters. Other than the bed, the only things upright was the desk at which he sat, and the dresser on which the broad mirror sat secured. His elbows were on the desk and his head in his hands. A few strands of his once beautiful head of hair fell away and his body was shaking. Beside his arm sat a stack of petitions, half of which were unread. His eyes were covered by his hands. "I don't want to read them. I don't," Jerkniv thought. He'd tried several times, but it was harder and harder to do his job well, and now? If only I'd listened to the foreigner's request. If I hadn't fought that battle? He cursed the fell fate to overcome his empire. The financial disaster of losing so much territory, the loss of the slave population of Dark Elves, and then the damn frogmen and their aides on top of everything else. No sooner do I manage to scrape together the funds to raise some soldiers to deal with it, than I find out that the damn caster has already done it. The raid stopped, but my border with that bastard has grown. At his right sat other documents, also unread. The Emperor didn't need to read them to know what they were. Mutiny reports. Every unit assigned to go to the border shared with the Kingdom of Nazarick had mutinied. So he stopped trying to send units. The result was that bandits and thieves, necromancers, and other undesirables essentially took over large swaths of territory. And even getting rid of the damn useless nobles didn't work. No scapegoats were enough. He cursed as he recollected the dreadful day he realized it was only a matter of time. When a group of nobles objected, openly, to his face, in the throne room itself, it was not because they objected, but because when he said to his guards, "Escort them out of the palace," they hesitated to obey. Now there's nothing left to do, he thought while he listened to the fighting outside. He took up one last piece of paper, a letter from one of his last remaining supporters. This letter, he read. "My lord, as per your instruction, I have hidden away your concubines and their children. From my own stores, I provided them with sufficient funds to live in comfort for the rest of their lives in various towns in the far-flung reaches of the Empire. When things have died down, I will move them west over the mountains, where they will be safe. Each of them is accompanied by a knight who will act as their guardian while pretending to be a husband. This is the best I was able to do for you. Thank you, for your trust, and for what you tried to do for the Empire. None could have anticipated the sorcerer's power. May it comfort you that history will vindicate you at least, and may the end be without pain." There was no signature on the letter, but Emperor Jerkniv knew who it was. He stood up from his seat, swaying a little as anxiety and hunger made his body unsteady. The chair fell over, but Jerkniv neither bothered to write it nor really noticed the clatter of its fall. He took the letter to a nearby candle. Its dim orange glow was the only thing to cast light over the room. The noise of the rampaging conflict in the coup was growing closer. From a single cacophony of noise, a symphony of chaos, he was beginning to catch a few words. Jerkniv closed his eyes and held the letter over the dancing little flame. The paper caught and the fire rose up over the page, consuming the precious words that those he once enjoyed were safe. The flames licked at his fingers, the heat began to caress his skin, the little tip of the fire drew closer. His heartbeat was slow. A preternatural calm was settling over him as he saw the last scrap of ink be consumed by the flaring light. The heat kissed his skin, despite the fact that every hateful treasured word was gone. "Until this paper is gone entirely, I will not be satisfied," he told himself, and so he held on. His hand shook a little as the fire ate its way upward. He held on as the pain sent waves of shivers up and down his body. His soft fingers seared, but his face never changed, not until the last scrap was released to be consumed and the brief brightening of his room faded again. The candle was alone in lighting the dark chamber of the Emperor, and his eyes fell on a chest left to him by his grandfather. It was over 100 years old and predated the Empire as it now was. It was painted with a golden griffin across the top, the symbol of the Elnix household, and was of dark, polished wood. The finish was so bright that when Jerkniv approached the chest, even in the dim light of the candle, the wood served as another mirror, reflecting his wrinkled face and almost completely bald head. The chest was passed from father to son, and had not, as far as he knew, ever been opened. There was only one admonition: open this in your darkest hour. The instructions came from his father the day he ascended to the purple, and as the din of fighting grew closer, Jerkniv thought, there could be no darker hour than this one, except perhaps my last, and I doubt I'll be able to open it then. So, with a weary hand he reached for the chest and broke the seal. It opened with a quiet creaking noise, and Jerkniv's sense of curiosity rose to the forefront despite his sense of despair. In the chest sat only a few items, none of them remarkable. A straight razor, along with a hermit's clothing, ash-stained, dark, and old. Complete with sandals of leather, a small coin pouch, and a knife. So this was his intent. Jerkniv thought, and with a bitter sour taste in his mouth he muttered, not that I have much hair left to cut off. But nonetheless, with the advice of the long-dead man laid bare under his eyes, a sense of Jerkniv's former self came back. I don't want to die, he realized, and reached for the items that offered some small hope of saving himself. The Allfather let out a grunt of bliss as he felt his essence flow into his beloved Albedo. She clenched her thighs tight against his body. The overwhelming strength of the succubus would have shattered the body of almost anyone else in the world. But for him they gave a loving squeeze paired with her orgasmic scream of ecstatic bliss. She fell forward, pressing her heated ample breasts against his chest, and she began to nuzzle her face against him. My love, Albedo whispered and kissed the side of his face. Do you want to get out of bed? Or just stay here? Stay, he said, and Albedo tittered as she nuzzled against his cheek, her hands roaming over his body wherever they could, exploring him as if they had not been lovers for over a year, but instead had only just come together for the first time. But we can't, he said with no small regret when he put the palm of his hand to her cheek and brought her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tender, like the fall of a butterfly's wings against skin, a far cry from the ravenous passion of the previous hours. We have work to do. The kingdom can't run without its guiding hands. Albedo gave him a tiny, teasing smile. I will be ever at your side, my lord, she said and slung her long slender legs off of his body to stand beside the bed. She brushed her hands through her inky dark hair, straightening it down her back and batted her wings twice, hard enough to blow the remaining covers off of the Allfather and knock them unceremoniously to the floor, leaving the naked body of the king there as a feast for her eyes. He rolled his eyes at her playful act and stood up after her. Heat rose from the sheets in testimony of their prior passions, but after rising from the bed, they settled their minds to the business at hand. Albedo went to the silk rope on the wall and gave it a quick, sharp yank to summon a maid. The Allfather, for his part, waved his hand and without a word, cast the cleansing spell he needed to remove any sweat, grime, or filth from his body. Albedo? He asked, holding out his hand to offer to do the same, but she gave a winsome smile back. No, my lord. I would rather carry the scent, she laughed when he rolled his eyes again, then approached. As my lord wills, she said with mock demureness before the common spell did its work. Within the hour they were in the throne room. The Allfather Ainzulgaun sat on the throne of kings, Albedo standing at his right hand, her sneering contempt only barely suppressed by the plastered-on smile that would have made a practiced whore proud. Her hands folded in front of her waist while at the base of the long steps a human petitioner made his plea. The petitioner, from a noble house in the Baharuth Empire, was dressed in a dark, flowing garment with golden fringe and tassels dangling down the center of the chest. Flamboyant to the point of gaudy, Ainz again wondered, is my sense of fashion the strange one? Everyone else took such gaudiness in stride or even admired it. This one seemed to have that in common with everyone else. Ainz blinked and forced himself to focus on what the kneeling representative had to say, rather than what he wore. So if it pleases the Allfather, we would be grateful if you would intervene in bringing peace to your neighbor. Since the emperor died, we hoped for a true peace to return, but the one that led the overthrow has died as well. Now, Arglan threatens us. The theocracy makes demands of us. Bandits raid cities now, not just towns or villages, while alliances and kingdoms beyond the east are marshalling soldiers. Only the kingdom of Nazarick has refused to kick our wounded body, and you were hoping that our gracious lord would see fit to salvage your corpse? Albedo asked. Her sharp tongue stung the nobleman enough to cause the man to flinch and lower his eyes down to the floor beneath his feet. Albedo. Ainz remonstrated her with nothing but a word. Forgive my outburst, my lord. He asks much, and offers nothing. I couldn't restrain my temper in the face of such insolence toward your generous person. Albedo answered with her eyes given only to her beloved, before turning her eyes to the visiting minister. I trust that a bowing of my head is a sufficient apology? She asked, and gave it without waiting for his answer. The minister rushed to agree, stammering out his words in his haste to keep up with the byplay at the throne. Of course, yes, I understand, I was clearly wrong. But we do not offer nothing. He half squeaked the last word. The nobles are raising armies. We're on the verge of civil war. If you could lend us your strength, then you would offer us consideration? Ain's guessed as the noble visitor trailed off under Ain's steady stare. It's true you aren't offering nothing, but what you want isn't my army. What you want is stability, and nobody in your declining empire is going to be loyal to me, particularly given our history. Settle on the strongest as best you can, and when that one rules, some accounting can be made between everyone in the arena of nations. The pale-faced noble turned bright red, his mouth opened, his eyes were so wide that Ain's wondered if they might fall out of the man's very head. Yes, of course, the All-Father of Nazarick is truly as wise as we have heard. His plan is brilliant, and to have come to it so quickly on hearing our troubles. I am in awe of your mighty mind. The noble was rambling on his praise until Ain's cleared his throat. The noble took the hint and rose to his feet. He bowed deeply, arms spread out like the wings of a bird. He bowed far forward, then rose and began to retreat without showing his back to the Allfather until he reached the towering double doors that reached the high ceiling of the dark stone throne room. Alone again for the moment, Albedo said with a charming smile spreading slowly over her face, "That was truly a brilliant plan, my lord. I am in awe of your foresight." "Thank you, Albedo. Now I believe we have an emissary from Dim Albion waiting next, don't we?" Ain's asked in haste. "Go ahead and summon him," he added before she could reply. As Albedo reached for the rope to ring in the next entry, Ain's racked his brain wondering, plan? What plan? Volume 7 C2. That is what he said. Baron Valdati said to his fellow nobles. The greatest men and women of the Baharuth Empire were gathered around a council table. None of them looked down when they heard the words the Allfather passed to them through their chosen emissary. The reason none looked down was to avoid seeing their careworn faces. A few wanted to avoid seeing the continued whitening of their hair, or the patches on their heads where it was starting to fall out. The lines on their faces, the crow's feet at their eyes, and their own fear reflected back at them. The fine council table was a constant cause for torment. To the strongest. It does make a peculiar kind of sense, doesn't it? Duke Hubastria said while she fanned her face in a failing attempt to stifle the heat of her body in the midst of the worst stress of her life. Her white and gold clothing hung loose around her body and her limbs alike. The tassels on the arms waved like leaves in the storm while she desperately waved her hand near her face. It does. Count Avastrim remarked, the legions are diminished, but still formidable, at least compared to most of our neighbors. The late bloody emperor built them well at least. With his children gone, there's nobody to prop up from the royal family even as a figurehead. So either we settle things the old way, or the empire ceases to exist. Then let's do it, now, before we're invaded and everybody is too invested in fighting with armies to take a chance on champions. Viscount Castlash insisted, his jowls flapping as he rushed out his insistence in an almost piggish squeal of fear. General Shanash chimed in the moment the Viscount finished his urging, I can vouch for the remaining legions, they are desperate for strength, and nobody wants to fight a civil war and a multi-pronged invasion. If you will the Empire to the strongest, then they will swear their oath to the victor. But I would strongly advise that we limit that to combat strength alone, no magic. The Empire is still a martial place, and after the last dealings with magic, and the fact that Fluda abandoned us, nobody will trust a simple caster. There was a general rumbling of agreement, and within the hour, the draft of the document was made and signed by all members of the council, with copies made and dispatched to every corner of the Empire. And beyond. To the strongest. What a brilliant suggestion. The general considered, reflecting on the advice of their dreadful neighbor, and was forced to conclude, only the wisest could have divined such an ornate way of avoiding war while forging an alliance that would more easily secure the peace thereafter. It was almost enough to let his aging heart stop the frantic beating that consumed him for months, and let the wrinkled old general sleep soundly for the first time in a long time. Brain Uncleus stood triumphant in the small arena of Tuvijar, the capital city of the Kingdom of Dim Albion. It wasn't much, barely more than boards in a ring with crude chairs and raised benches, but beyond the little space stone structures, the building blocks of a much larger and majestic one were starting to rise in the distance. In a few years it would rival our winter, but for now this was enough for him. His katana raised high overhead, the stone spittle lay prone on his back, defeated like the rest. In the stands, in what passed for the royal box, the Queen of Frost was politely applauding his victory. Brain grinned and took a bow, stepping back from the broken opponent. Leaving those idiots was the best thing I ever did, he reflected when the crowd of both demi-humans, elves and even a few humans cheered him on. The bandits he once led were now almost certainly dead, having failed to detect the change in the winds of power giving rise to the new Wolf Queen and King of Carney, or the ascendance of Crimson Queen Renna. Now, thanks to his foresight, he grinned and snatched a coin out of the air which was thrown from the Queen's own box. I'm getting rich, and I get to do what I love to do best. He thought and made another deep bow to the dragonid Queen, Nyabaraha. Malbian was a shockingly cosmopolitan place, with former prisoners of war from the Roble Holy Kingdom having accepted offers of farmland of their own as opposed to lives as mere serfs working somebody else's property. But also demi-humans of races Brain never heard of, and elves who traveled freely about the region without so much as a care. A naked virgin could walk from town to town with a bag of gold in each hand and arrive in safety. That was the Queen's boast, and it was steadily proving true, with everyone prone to violence either brought into the national army, turned into a gladiator, or killed by the former two groups. The applause began to die as the Queen stood, her wings opened wide at her back, the universal call for silence, while a herald stood at her side. Let it be proclaimed on this day, that 1 year hence there will be a tournament in the grand arena of our winter. The prize, rulership of the empire itself. The throne of the bloody emperor shall pass to the strongest, be they man, woman, demi-human, or even heteromorph. The legions shall obey. All nations and peoples are invited to bring their champions. All those of ambition are invited to go and fight for themselves. Let the strongest rule, and all the rest of the world follow. Consternation went up in an instant. Demi-humans, elves, and humans set to gossiping and jabbering, but the blue-haired Brain Unglaeus only heard one thing. I could finally prove myself to be the very best to ever carry a sword. How could I say no to that? Empire. A throne. That's nothing. Nothing compared to this. He sheathed his blade and began to shout with childlike glee. Nor was he the only one. At his back, gladiators waiting for their turn to fight for the praise of the crowd were cheering as well, and the Queen snapped her wings in and out once, creating a noise like the crack of a whip. Further games are cancelled. Warriors and gladiators, you have training to get to. A throne awaits, and a story your children will tell long after you are gone, whether they're in a palace or not. Go. Go and have your dreams. Her wings cracked like a whip again, and the cheers redoubled as the Queen of Frost gave her permission to all the big dreamers to follow their desires to whatever end they were carried toward. Queen Kalka lay on her back in the royal bed. Her hair, once golden blonde, was now white as an old woman's. Though the rest of her body didn't match, she still moved very little. The cause was suckling at her breast, the son of the Allfather, dark of hair, and with a powerful wail when the little wiggling child was displeased. He was the spitted image of both his parents. So that's their solution, is it? Kalka asked. Her voice sounded weary, still weak despite so much time having passed. Kellett put a sympathizing hand on the shoulder of her lover. It is, and a good one I think. Kellett acknowledged. I wish it waited a good 20 years though. I think Aurelian here might be able to win it when he gets older. She didn't laugh, it wasn't a joke. Birthing the boy had nearly killed the Queen, leaving her in a coma for months from which no magic could awaken her, and when she did, most of her skill with magic as well as most of her body's strength was lost. Even now, she was only slowly regaining what was hers, as if she died and then resurrected. It was for that reason that Kellett's hand lingered longer on the arm of her lover than was truly proper, even alone, as they were conducting the business of ruling the Holy Kingdom. Perhaps he could, Kalka said, caressing the top of the boy's head and cooing down at him. But I pray he never has to take such a risk. Still, what will we do? Kellett knew what the Queen was asking. What was her husband planning to do, and to that end, Kellett pulled out a document, a letter from the Allfather. Your husband states his intention to provide a champion of his kingdom. and to also attend the event in his capacity as the head of state. He invites you to join him and bring the crown prince. A smile formed on the queen's face, the little corners of her mouth rising like the sun on a spring day. Kalka. I know that look. You know you can't bear another. It would kill you, Kelit said, and the queen shook her head and said, I know, my love, I know. But it will be nice to see him again. To see him hold our son again. I'm still permitted sentiment as a queen, and I admit I'm also a little curious. I've never met the woman he loves. I sometimes wonder about that. What is she like? Is she pretty? Is she charming? Witty? I can't help but envy her a little, though I hope that one day, if they have children, that our heirs won't be at odds with one another. We can only hope, Your Majesty. Kelit advised and held her arms out to accept the baby. He'd ceased to suckle and begun to nap in his mother's arms. Kalka let him go only with reluctance, and waited for the slender brown-haired magic caster to join the queen in the royal bed after laying him down to sleep. We have a little time before the rest of the castle is awake. Then let's not waste it. The queen whispered and blew out the candle, opening her arms to receive her lover again. Kino was pressed up against Momin as close as she could be without sewing her skin to his. While she normally would use the excuse that the guild hall was crowded, today it wasn't. So she just said nothing and pressed herself against him while Gagran and Lupu continued to talk shit and slam back-to-back beers. Face facts, Red. You may be top-heavy, but that's it, you can't keep up with me. Gagran grinned in her oafish way, showing off all her teeth and vigorously wiping beer foam from her lips before slamming her tankard down. You say that, virgin, but I was born loving the brew, while you only adopted it. Besides, I spend time drinking while you try to seduce virgin adventurer boys. I'm more experienced. Lupus Regina quipped back. The nickname of Red suited the red-headed cleric who partnered with Lord Momin, given that the strands of fiery red hung in two braids that went far down her back, and yet despite what should have been a liability in battle, only Kino was able to give the cleric a run for her money. Lakes and the twins sat drinking quietly while watching the battle of booze and wits between the two adventurers while discreetly ignoring the way Kino kept touching Momin, above the table, and they suspected beneath it. We're going to attend the tournament, Lord Momin, Kino said, then asked with a mooning gaze up into his deep-set eyes, are you going to participate? Possibly. At the very least I plan to attend. How could I not? Momin made a grandiose dramatic gesture, waving a hand out toward the ceiling. To see such a show is a chance that comes not once every 100 years. Pandora's actor played the role to the hilt, and his chief audience, Kino, ate it up. Why don't we all go together? You don't have to decide if you want to compete or not until the last day, and then you'll already be there after you get a chance to scout out the competition. Kino suggested, batting her eyes up at her idol. The journey would be more comfortable together, she said and tried to make her voice at least a little bit seductive. Why yes, of course. Pandora's actor answered. The sudden question and open invitation to more was the most blatant of the little vampire's acts of affection. He readjusted himself a little, and the vampire beamed up at him with bright eyes that he knew lay behind her mask. She could hide nothing from him, and nothing from the intelligence-gathering abilities of Nazarick who plumbed the depths of her past at his urging. Pandora's actor's mind raced. She must be afraid of being far from me for long. And perhaps it would be a pleasant experience. I don't have to do anything here for now. And accompanying them as assets of mine Veta is vital. When did you want to leave? He asked, and allowed Kino's hand to linger on his thigh. The Elf King slapped the woman with the back of his hand. She fell off of him and down to the floor. Move faster, wretch, he bellowed, and she immediately lay prone and arched herself to draw his seed into her. She was weeping, but as long as she obeyed the command, how much she cried did nothing to distract her king after he'd had his enjoyment. My king. The guard at the door uttered, his face stained with tears after watching the king defile his wife while he was on duty protecting the man, shame washing over the elven warrior that he was sure would never wash away from either of the pair. What is it? The Elf King snapped. The slain theocracy has pulled back. If we make an attack now rather than attend, we can reverse the whole war. The guard tried not to look at his wife. It was the third time he tried to distract his lord from the woman with this news, and each time it failed. But having spent himself several times, the king finally chose to listen. His massive, towering body was almost monster-like, Broad and thickly muscled like a human berserker, his centuries of rule went unchallenged no matter his propensity toward violence and the violating of his own people's women. She will probably be there. The king grunted, thinking of the child he created with the last trump card of humanity. And probably, there will be other strong women. Maybe my own race is a total failure. Maybe I should try the women of other peoples. The thought was a pleasant one. He glanced down out of the corner of his eye. The woman turned her face away while she lay there, her eyes falling to her broken husband. No. I am going to attend. You weak trash can do what you like while I'm gone. Try to make something useful for me. But for now. One more time before I get ready to leave, he said, and the guard only muttered, "Yes, my lord," and closed his eyes while his wife whimpered at the renewed invasion as the king assaulted her again. Both husband and wife had only one thought in their minds. Please, please let him die. So you still have not found a solution, Demiurge? Heinz asked with no small disappointment. The archdevil knelt in front of the raised desk of the last supreme being. We have had some success, my lord. The one called Remedios has thus far been turned into a rat woman, a cat woman, an elf, an orc, and others. She has a strong proclivity toward suicide however, taking her life quickly after any transformation. It keeps Pestonia quite busy, however when she dies, she reverts back to human. This is proof that the transformation is temporary. Our standard race change item. It is simply too weak for your lordship. And with a world item incorporated into your body, we simply don't know what will happen. Please, forgive this unworthy failure. Demiurge's voice became miserable, his face downcast, his hands trembled on his knee, his body stiff and anxious both at once. It's fine, if we had the answer it wouldn't need to be researched. Heinz explained, continue your efforts, I am sure you will be successful one day soon, my Demiurge. My lord, Demiurge exclaimed in a half-squeak and half-relieved cry. He rose to his feet and retreated out of the inner office, allowing Albedo to breeze past him with only friendly nods of acknowledgement. Albedo, you've heard? Heinz asked and set down the quill as if he'd been writing when she entered. The tournament? She replied, a broad toothy smile on her face. Yes, my lord. Your plan has come to fruition, and of course I had all potential key players watched. There are some interesting potential candidates, nothing we cannot easily defeat, but we will require more than a battle made for the strongest of these fights, particularly to defeat the spear wielder from the slain theocracy. I see, so do you propose to enter the fight yourself then? Heinz asked while she approached to stand beside him. If it is my lord's will, I will fight all the demons of hell at once, naked, with only my breasts as weapons. But, she took his hand at the wrist. If my king is asking my opinion, I wouldn't choose to risk his child, she said and put his hand over her belly. It was with speed even her eyes could not follow, that he was on his feet and capturing her lips in an impassioned kiss.